which is North Omaha, Northeast Douglas County. I serve as the chair of Judiciary. We will start off by having members of the committee and staff do self-introduction, starting with my right.
Megan Kilty, legal counsel. Antonita Pierce, committee clerk.
Rick Holcroft, Senator for District 36, which is West and South Sarpy County.
Barry DeKay, District 40, which is Holt, Knox, Cedar, Antelope, northern part of Pierce, and most of Dixon County.
Also assisting us are our committee pages, Logan Burtek from Norfolk, who's a political science major and criminology major at UNL, and Isabel Cold, who from Omaha was a political science and a pre-law major at UNL. This afternoon, we'll be hearing 4 bills. We'll be taking them up in the order that is listed outside the room. On the table, you will find, in the back of the room, you will find blue testifier sheets. If you are planning to testify, please fill those out. Hand it to the pages so we can make sure we keep accurate records. If you do not want to testify but want to let your presence be known for the record, there are gold sheets in the back. Just fill them out and state your position on that sheet. Also note that it's a legislative policy that letters for the record must be received by noon prior date to the hearing. Any handouts, please make sure you have 10. If you don't have 10, the pages will make copies for the committee. Testimony for each bill begins with the introducer opening statement, followed by the proponents. Then we'll have opponents, and then followed by those in a neutral capacity. The introducer of the bill will be given the opportunity after that to make closing statements. We ask you begin your testimony by giving us first and last names. Please spell your first and last name for the record. We will be using a 3-minute light system today. When you begin your testimony, the light on the table will be green, then followed by yellow. That'll be your 1-minute warning. Then red, we ask you to wrap up. I'd like to remind everyone, including senators, to please turn off your cell phones or have them put on vibrate. With that, we'll begin today's hearing with LB 307.
Should be ready.
Oh, okay. Hello. Welcome to your judiciary.
Thank you all very much, and thank you for your patience. Good afternoon, Chairman Wayne and members of the Judiciary Committee. I'm Senator Megan Hunt, MEGAN-HUNT, and today I'm introducing LB 307. LB 307 is a bill that would authorize localities to adopt syringe service programs as part of a public health effort to reduce the spread of infectious disease. Catching my breath a little bit, sorry.
You're fine. Take your time.
Okay. I'm bringing this bill in partnership with the Nebraska AIDS Project and the National Harm Reduction Coalition. Syringe service programs, formerly known as needle exchange programs, are community-based programs that provide access to sterile needles and syringes, facilitate safe disposal of used syringes, and they often also provide other services such as referral to substance abuse treatment programs, screening for HIV and other sexually transmitted diseases, overdose prevention education, naloxone distribution, and referrals for other medical or mental health services. These programs are proven to help people stop injecting drugs. Intravenous drug users who come in contact with a syringe service program are 4 to 5 times more likely to enter treatment and engage in long-term recovery than users who do not use one of these programs. They're also proven to reduce infections of HIV, hepatitis C, and other bloodborne infections by as much as 50%. So why do we need this in Nebraska? When advocates approached me about bringing this bill, I was surprised to learn that Nebraska's HIV infection rate is at its highest in over a decade. In the 3-year period from 2018 to 2021, while the US experienced about a 5% decrease in new HIV diagnoses, Nebraska saw a 26% increase in HIV. That's a hugely significant increase, and I think we should examine what's going on here. Increasingly, more of these infections are being linked to injection drug use than ever before, and I'll let our testifiers coming up behind me speak more about their experience with that. An HIV diagnosis used to mean a death sentence, as without treatment, HIV progresses to AIDS, which is highly fatal. Fortunately, with today's science, we are in a place where there are very effective drug treatments available that can prevent people living with HIV from ever developing AIDS. With early diagnosis and treatment, many people with HIV go on to live very long and healthy lives, but these drugs remain expensive. The average lifetime cost of treating a person with HIV is somewhere around $420,000. An added benefit of the syringe service program that I'm proposing is it offers safe disposal for used needles, which is proven to reduce the risk of occupational needle stick injuries for first responders and law enforcement. With LB 307, not only can we reduce potential harm experienced by those struggling with addiction, we can also honor and protect our first responders and law enforcement that are out in our communities doing their best to protect the public. With LB 307, what we would be doing is removing the statutory barrier that currently exists and criminalizes anyone who distributes sterile syringes or hypodermic needles. And we would be giving localities the authority, if they so choose, to authorize local behavioral or public health organizations to implement safe syringe service programs to prevent the spread of infectious disease. We're seeing that in Nebraska, something significant and alarming is going on with the rapid rise in injection-related HIV infections. And what I've learned in preparing for this bill is that organizations like the Nebraska AIDS Project, behavioral health clinics, these organizations would like to implement this type of program in Nebraska. They're ready and willing to do so, but our current law currently prohibits this. I want to emphasize that if LB 307 passes, it does not automatically give free rein to any public or behavioral health organization to just start distributing syringes on their own. The local jurisdiction needs to authorize it first. So that would be the city council or the village board or whatever appropriate local authority for the local jurisdiction would have to decide that they want to authorize this first. It would be up to them to prescribe the rules for the program. And under LB 307, if a community is seeing an outbreak, the appropriate local governing body would have the option to decide to authorize an SSP to address the needs of their community. This is not a mandate, it's an issue of local control, and it gives the opportunity for local control to every jurisdiction. Each adopting community would get to decide how they want their program to work. So it's really a local control idea, it's a conservative idea, and you'll see through testimony today that there's a substantial conservative movement for supporting the expansion of SSPs as part of harm reduction efforts. I anticipate a question might come up as to whether this is helpful in rural communities, if it's as helpful in rural communities as it would be for, say, Lincoln and Omaha. And you might be surprised to learn, as I was, that rural areas are actually being hit hardest right now by the spread of bloodborne disease. In 2021, the year that saw the decade high of new HIV cases in Nebraska, DHHS reports that infections were more frequent among rural counties, those other than Douglas, Lancaster, and Sarpy. And the new number of HIV diagnoses among rural county residents had nearly doubled. Individuals with new HIV diagnoses residing in rural counties had lower initial T-cell counts than those in urban counties, meaning they had delayed diagnoses, pointing to a lack of available testing services in those areas. So when talking with stakeholders about this, it sounds like rural communities are actually those that stand to benefit most from this bill. We've also all heard of the recent rise in fentanyl use and overdoses. Fentanyl is an extremely powerful drug that can be very lethal in small doses. An added benefit of opening a door for SSPs in Nebraska is that they often provide overdose awareness training, distribute overdose prevention tools like fentanyl test strips, and can dispense the overdose reversal medication naloxone. 214 Nebraskans died from overdose in 2020, and many of us know someone directly or know someone whose family has been impacted by fentanyl use. Many of these tragic deaths are young people that we have lost. What if some of these folks had been able to visit an SSP and received fentanyl test strips and overdose prevention training before they used for the last time? I think we'd all agree any tool that can add to our toolboxes to prevent these needless deaths is worthy of consideration. I'm not a medical expert, but any of us with a basic understanding of how addiction works, and with most of these opioids that people are injecting being extremely addictive, we know that it is difficult for users facing addiction to simply stop on their own. The truth is that usually folks are just going to use until they either overdose or they get help, resources, and education that they need to fight their addiction. SSPs are a way to reduce the harm of intravenous drug use in the now, while pointing users toward building healthier habits in the future. Let's allow communities to make the choice about whether an SSP could be beneficial for them. The people here to testify today are experts on this, so I would encourage you to ask them to answer questions you have right now. But I'm also, of course, happy to answer any questions you have and do my best. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee? Senator Geist?
I'm curious about, and maybe you'll need to send me to someone behind you, but I am curious about the fentanyl test strips and what those are and where those are available. Do you know?
Anecdotally, I can tell you, I hear about fentanyl test strips being available from different community groups and advocacy organizations. Like you can get them to test drugs. Not to, I'm not judging people who face addiction. I haven't ever used a fentanyl test strip. I don't know how it works, but
Okay.
yes, an expert behind me can talk
I
about
haven't heard of that, so. and
I know that they're used to prevent overdoses for people who are maybe using party drugs or doing something else just to make sure that they're not getting something has fentanyl in it that would be much more lethal than they think it would be.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, Senator Geist. Other questions? Senator Decay.
Thank you, Senator DeBoer. Senator Hunt, with this, so that I understand this, this gives more community-based organizations the ability to distribute syringes and needles, and it's not going to affect like your pharmacies like Walgreens, CVS, and stuff like that.
What the bill does is it allows local jurisdictions, so it would be the city council or a village board, to create rules and regulations around how a program like this would work for them. They wouldn't be able to have a program unless the city authorized it. So if the city authorized it, then yes, authorized organization with trained providers or a pharmacy could distribute, yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the committee? Senator McKinney?
Thank you, Senator Wayne. Thank you, Senator Hunt. One day I went down a YouTube dark hole, and I was
Been there.
and I was watching a video, I think on like Vice News or something, about another testing thing that's being used. I think probably in California, where it's not a test strip, but it's like some electronic thing that people are using to test to see if like fentanyl is in there. And I was wondering if that was being used here in our state.
I have no idea, but I'm curious too, so maybe someone can tell
All
us.
right. Thank you.
Anything we can do to reduce the harm of addiction is, I'm definitely curious about.
Thanks.
Any other questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
First, we'll have proponents. First proponent.
Chairman Wayne, I may need to waive my close, but
Okay,
I'm available for questions anytime. Thank you.
thank you.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thank you, Chair Wayne, members of the committee. My name is Lacey Bolte, LacieBolte, and I'm a representative of Nebraska AIDS Project. Thank you to Senator Hunt for an opportunity to talk to you all about HIV and also for introducing this bill. It's really important to us. Nebraska AIDS Project leads the community to overcome HIV and stigma through supportive services, advocacy, and education. I'm speaking today to request your support of LB 307. This would authorize local jurisdictions to open syringe service programs, a crucial tool for Nebraska to prevent new HIV and hepatitis infections. Nebraska AIDS Project is a nonprofit organization that serves the entire state of Nebraska, from Scottsbluff to Omaha, supporting over 1,000 Nebraskans living with HIV each year. Additionally, we are the leading experts in HIV prevention, offering free, instant HIV testing to anyone who walks through our doors. Nebraska's HIV infection rate is at its highest in over a decade. We've seen a 26% increase in new HIV diagnoses from 2018 to 2021. This is not typical. Nebraska has experienced this 26% increase, while the rest of the U.S. has experienced a 4.6% decrease in HIV diagnoses during that same time period. Nebraska is fortunate to have tools and infrastructure to prevent HIV. We have routine testing, we have access to PrEP, which is a prescription medication that can prevent HIV transmission. However, we are missing key populations, which may account for this historic rise in infections. In 2021, 24% of new diagnoses of HIV in Nebraska were linked to injection drug use. This is a dramatic increase. Only 8% of cases were linked to injection drug use in 2018. These linked diagnoses span both rural and urban populations. We have an opportunity now to give Nebraska communities both the access and the tools necessary to combat this recent outbreak. Legislative Bill 307 is a crucial tool for Nebraska to prevent new HIV and hepatitis infections. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you for being here. Next proponent.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Edward Krumpetich, EDW-ARD, KRUMP-OTICH. I'm the Upper Midwest Policy Lead for the National Harm Reduction Coalition. Thank you, Megan, for bringing such an amazing bill, and it's a pleasure to be here with each of you today. Like I said, my name is Edward Krumpetich. I'm humbled and certainly honored to be testifying here in the state of Nebraska regarding LB 307 and the need for local communities to authorize public and behavioral health programs to implement syringe service programs in this state. Syringe service programs, they're community-based prevention tools that can provide a range of services. You used to hear them about as needle exchanges. That's not quite true. So they include linkage to substance use disorder treatment, access to and disposal of sterile syringes and injection equipment, vaccination, linkage to mental health, behavioral health care, and treatment for infectious diseases. Nebraska is in a state of need. 2021 HIV numbers from DHS here in Nebraska were at record levels. And I want to also indicate that hepatitis C fared little better, increasing in similar populations. Unfortunately, Nebraska's rise in HIV has national precedent. Indiana faced a similar situation in late 2014 and early 2015 when an HIV outbreak in Scott County drove then Governor, former Vice President Mike Pence to declare a public health emergency on March 26, 2015. In order to quell the epidemic, syringe service programs were authorized by then Governor Pence, which subsequently contained the outbreak. The former Vice President would go on to say, "We ended the spread of the HIV virus in that community. If not for SSP intervention at that time, the toll could have been much worse." We know that studies from Indiana today would go back, and earlier implementation of these programs would have held cases to less than 10 cases, 173 case reduction. Nearly 30 years of research shows that comprehensive SSPs are associated with an estimated 50% reduction in HIV cases. The data also shows that new users of SSPs are 5 times more likely to enter drug treatment and 3 times more likely to stop using drugs than the people who do not use these programs. 3 times more likely to stop using drugs. Evidence also shows they do not increase crime. 1 in 3 officers may be struck with a needle during their lifetime of service. And SSPs reduce these needle stick injuries by first responders by an exorbitant amount. The CDC estimates that the cost of 1 infection of HIV is $380,000 over the course of a lifetime. Nebraska's HIV numbers in 2021 alone would cost approximately $12,540,000. This does not account for the 703 infections of Hep C, which will cost the state about $38 million because of the medication which costs and this is a conservative estimate by the CDC, $54,000 in treatment. That is a total of $50 million in
I gotta
expenses.
ask you to wrap up.
I will, thank you. Do I have?
Yeah,
one? Thank you.
15 seconds.
Appreciate
Call it
you.
good.
SSP intervention could have cut these 2021 numbers in half. They are safe, evidence-based, heavily researched, and very effective. LB 307 would allow local Nebraska communities the deference in implementing these programs. I am available to answer any questions you may have.
Any questions from the committee? Senator Hokar.
Thank you, Chairman Wayne. Just to help out with the number, we threw a lot of numbers out there, and actually the numbers I got from Lacey here in her handouts, she mentions in her testimony that there were thousands of cases, but the handout shows 104 cases in 2021. So what's the real number?
Yep, so that is correct. So we have a 72 case, I believe in 2020, the increase to 104 cases in 2021.
So we have 104 cases of HIV in the state of Nebraska?
That
what
is correct, Senator.
Thank you.
Senator Decriminalize.
Thank you. What is the screening process that will take place to make sure that the people that should have the syringes are getting them and the people that shouldn't have them aren't getting them?
Yeah, so we know that from research, people who hold either dirty syringes and do not dispose of them are at a market-like high increase. To answer your question, the screening process would come from the relationship with the program itself and from the local communities. Many of the referrals in other states, like states of Minnesota, for example, are done by law enforcement. Law enforcement are the ones who refer to syringe exchange programs, and they're the ones who make sure that people are visiting them because they are the access point to things like treatment, behavioral health care. So we know that it plays the intermediary role between the treatment profile and the street.
Quick question, with the syringe program, is there a cost to the people that want to come and get those syringes and stuff? Is there a cost that they have to provide, or is that free to them to be able to use, to be able to obtain those syringes and stuff for the reasons?
I can't speak for every state, but what I can say is most of the time these are free services. So we want to make sure that in order to quell, like Governor Pence did, we want to make sure that we're bringing back the syringes that have been used. We want people to be as safe as possible. And in that process, they're being exposed to all of the other services that they provide.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the committee? Senator DeBoer.
I just have one clarifying question. I think you said that there were 104 cases of HIV in Nebraska. I think that's new cases is what I've read.
Correct.
Yeah, that's.
I'm sorry. Yes, 104 new cases. To answer your question. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. So when I mentioned the cost, that 2021 number was 104 new cases of HIV in the state.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the committee? Seeing none, thank you for being here.
Hey, thank you.
Next proponent. Next proponent. Welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Senators. My name is Ryan Carruthers, RyanCarruthers. I'm here today representing Centerpoint as its Chief Clinical Officer and the Nebraska Association of Behavioral Health Organizations, NABHO, of which Centerpoint is a member. We appear in support of LB 307. I hold my PhD in counseling studies and have almost 18 years experience working with individuals diagnosed with substance use disorders. I've been presenting at seminars and teaching on the topic of harm reduction efforts while working to implement better approaches to addiction treatment for the last 15 years. Harm reduction is an approach to treating people with addictions that focuses on meeting them where they're at, developing positive relationships with them even when they are using, and reducing the overall negative consequences of their drug use to society. It wasn't long ago that the value of condoms was debated in a similar way to this effort. The two practices use similar terminology and have similar disease prevention goals. Would abstinence from drug use be the best course of action? Certainly. Would stopping people from using drugs intravenously be the end goal? Absolutely. However, we all know that people are going to still use drugs. It's an undeniable reality in our world and certainly in our state. We cannot just ignore and condemn those that use drugs. We must provide them with the services that they need and they do need these services. Those in opposition to harm reduction efforts have long claimed that efforts like a SSP will increase the number of people using drugs in that manner. That is not the case at all. According to the National Institute on Drug Abuse, SSPs are, quote, safe, effective, and cost-saving tools that can prevent HIV and high-risk injection behaviors among people who use drugs. It is the relationships that we develop as addiction and behavioral health professionals that is the key to getting people eventually off drugs entirely. We know that jail increases the likelihood of recidivism, and incarceration is an expensive alternative. Someone should not have to get arrested in order to get help. This legislation asks for no money out of the budget. It does not legalize or condone the possession, use of, or distribution of illicit drugs. It allows people to come to programs like those I represent today in order to get the help that they are looking for. Any
Any questions from the committee? Senator Holcroft.
Thank you, Chairman Wayne. Sorry, I've lost track of HIV as far as where are we with this? I think that is it a effective treatment but no cure? Is that where we are still with HIV?
I don't represent any organizations that treat HIV.
Okay, thank you. Maybe someone else can answer that question.
Any other questions from the committee? Thank you for being here. Next proponent.
Good afternoon. My name is Patrick Habecker. That's PatrickHabecker. And I work as a research assistant professor in the Rural Drug Addiction Research Center here at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. I'm here to testify in support of LB 307, and I'm not representing the university with this testimony. Syringe service programs, as you have heard, are the gold standard and evidence-based program when we're dealing with HIV amongst people who are injecting drugs. This is universal in the United States, and this is backed by literally decades of research on their efficacy to reduce HIV and hepatitis C. When done well, these programs work, they are safe, and they can save money compared to the cost of treating HIV cases that result from injection drug use. SSPs are not associated with increased crime, substance use, or the litter of injection equipment. And this includes the risk of accidental sticks from law enforcement officers, emergency medical personnel. It reduces this risk. Both the Centers for Disease Control, the National Institutes of Health, and their subdivision, the National Institutes for Drug Abuse, are unanimous in this stance. SSPs work. They reduce HIV among this population. The questions that remain are how to best implement these programs. And the current answer is at the local level. Local levels have a sense of what is going on, what is needed, instead of a state-down, one-form-fits-all. This allows us to tailor a program that works in Omaha to one that works in Gordon, to one that works in Imperial or Scottsbluff. This sets the control at the appropriate level. When done well, SSPs have a remarkable fact that because they become points of contact for people who use drugs in a non-discriminatory, non-stigmatized way, they can become links for a host of other programs, what other people have talked about: treatment, education, housing, employment. That is one of the real magics to SSPs, is that they provide this point of contact, and all sorts of wonderful things can occur from it. I would remind you all that HIV is not spontaneous from substance use. You can consume methamphetamine for years and you will not magically come down with HIV. It is the condition of the fact of how we control needles and how we control syringes, and SSPs are an effective way to reduce this risk. Finally, last reminder, everybody, we are connected. The people who are using drugs are maybe not a friend, but they are connected within a few degrees of separation. The health of all of us affects all of us and is an influence on all of us. And this is a chance to help this become a better solution in Nebraska. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Next proponent.
Thank you, Chairman Wayne and members of the Judiciary Committee. My name is Abby Swatsworth, ABBISWATSWORTH. I'm the Executive Director of Out Nebraska, a statewide nonpartisan nonprofit working to celebrate and empower LGBTQ Nebraskans. Out Nebraska supports LB 307 because it would empower local health departments to take measures to help reduce the spread of HIV and hepatitis, as well as help local health departments connect Nebraskans to medical care, substance use treatment, health education, vaccinations, and disease testing. Our local health departments understand their service areas best, and empowering them to make decisions to mitigate the risk of infection will help so many Nebraskans. Our LGBTQ community has been uniquely impacted by the HIV epidemic in the United States. For many years, treatment and prevention measures were not given the resources they needed because HIV was thought to be a gay disease. According to the CDC, gay men and transgender women, especially those who are Black or Latino, continue to experience higher rates of new HIV diagnosis than other groups. In 2021, Nebraska saw our largest increase in new HIV infections in over a decade. For LGBTQ Nebraskans living with HIV, working with trusted local resources is incredibly important so they can be connected with care. We need to equip localities to address the needs of Nebraskans in their communities. Harm reduction efforts like LB 307 are just one way that we can do this. We urge the committee to pass this bill. Thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you for being here today. Any other proponents?
Thank you, Chairman Wayne, committee. I'm Stacy McKenna, STACEY-MCKENNA. I am here today testifying on behalf of the R Street Institute. We are a public policy research organization that supports free markets and limited effective government. We are testifying in support of LB 307. And I don't want to dwell on all of the information that other folks have already provided because they've given you a lot of good statistics. But I want to speak a little bit to what we've learned from some recent research about the benefits of SSPs specifically in rural contexts, right? So Nebraska can learn from what we've seen in Kentucky, where in 2015, they legalized SSPs. More than 70 now operate across the state, and the majority of them are in counties with fewer than 40,000 people. They have seen similar declines in rates of HIV infection and other infectious diseases, viral hepatitis, hepatitis C, also skin infections. All of these things, so the decline in the rates have been similar to what the CDC reports at about 50%. They also started seeing those declines as soon as about a month from when the SSPs first opened. I also want to talk a little bit about the importance of comprehensiveness and tailored local control, right? These are things that LB 307 will not just permit, but require communities to be involved in actually making sure that we've got policies and programs in place that fit the local needs and understand their local communities. And what we've seen from the research on that nationally is that this makes the organizations, not only are they more effective, but they're more cost effective. And we've already heard that SSPs are extremely cost saving. One study found that it was like, say, $27 on the dollar or something like that. They've been called the most cost effective public health intervention ever. So I don't want to take up any more of your time, but I just want to say once again that we are in support of LB 307. Please consider this as an intervention that can not only help Nebraska, but really give local communities the control to do this in a way that makes sense for them. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Any questions from the community? Seeing none, thank you for being here. Welcome.
Hello. Dear Chairperson Wayne and members of the Judiciary Committee, my name is Adele Burke, ADELLEBURK, and I'm a Senior Manager of Public Affairs with Planned Parenthood North Central States in Nebraska. Our mission at PPNCS is to empower vital generations by providing and advocating for sexual and reproductive health so that more people can choose their own path to a healthy and meaningful life. To that end, we're strongly in favor of LB 307. Many folks who have gone before me have talked about the many public health benefits to SSPs. So I'll just talk a little bit about our Planned Parenthood perspective. As a medical provider focused on sexual and reproductive health care, Planned Parenthood North Central States provides testing and treatment for HIV, as well as pre-exposure prophylactics. Every day, our providers see the impacts of HIV on the lives of our patients. And in addition, many Planned Parenthood organizations across the country have the option to refer their patients to SSPs to get the supplies they need for self-administered injections. LB 307 would allow our organization to take advantage of similar programs in Nebraska and ensure that our patients are wrapped with a community care that can provide all the resources they need to be safe and healthy. Thank you to Senator Hunt for bringing LB 307, and I urge you all to advance the bill to general file. And I can take any questions you might have.
Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you for being here. Any other proponents? Any other proponents? Any opponents? Opponents? Anybody testifying in neutral capacity? Senator Hunt? Yep. Welcome back. For the record, we received 20 letters, 15 in support, 4 in opposition, and 1 in neutral. Welcome back, Senator Hunt.
Thank you, Chairman Wayne. I'd like to distribute this before I wrap up here, just to make sure the committee has it. It's a letter of support from Douglas County Sheriff Aaron Hansen. And I think my view is when the sheriff's office and Senator Hunt agree on something, like maybe it's okay. But I wanted to speak to the question earlier about cost for this program. There's federal funding available under the Federal Consolidated Appropriations Act to states and localities that meet certain criteria and have programs like this. And that funding can be used to support administrative costs of SSPs, testing, education, referrals, but it just cannot be used for syringes themselves. So the cost of syringes would probably be most likely funded by grants, foundations, private donors, nonprofits that provide these things. And if the city or locality saw fit and they wanted to, they could fund it themselves too. But again, that would be left up to the individual jurisdiction of that city. To be clear, LB 307 doesn't create any state obligation for funding. It's just a permissive bill for local control saying, you know, if a city sees fit and they have the organizations and the, you know, the institutional framework to provide this type of service, that the state's no longer going to stand in the way of that. Thank you.
Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you very much.
That'll close the hearing on LB 307. We will open the hearing on LB 436. Welcome, Senator Geist.
Thank you, Chairman Wayne, and good afternoon, members of the Judiciary Committee. For the record, my name is Suzanne Geist, Suzannegeist. I represent District 25, which is the southeast corner of Lincoln and Lancaster County. LB 436 updates the Nebraska Uniform Controlled Substances Act to conform the state controlled substances schedule to the federal controlled substance schedule. Every time the federal government updates their controlled substance schedule, the state of Nebraska updates their schedule with a bill the following session, which is the reason I introduced this bill. This bill will make updates to Schedule 1 controlled substances, Schedule 4 controlled substances, and Schedule 5 controlled substances. And for clarification, Schedule 1 controlled substances have no currently accepted medical use in the United States, and there is a high potential for abuse. Schedule 4 have a low potential for abuse relative to substances in Schedule 3. Schedule 5, controlled substances have little potential for abuse relative to Schedule 4. So you see how this goes. And they currently have an accepted medical use and treatment in the United States. This bill includes the outlawing of certain fentanyl-related substances. These are non-FDA approved drugs, which include designer or street drugs that are chemically and structurally related to fentanyl. The Schedule 4 and 5 updates will allow for specific FDA-approved drugs to be used in Nebraska. Thank you for your time and attention. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions from the committee? Seeing none? Okay. First, we'll have proponents. Proponents. Welcome.
Thank you, Chairman Wayne. Good afternoon. Happy Thursday, everyone. My name is Dr. Raj Selvaraj, R-A-J, S-E-L-V-A-R-A-J. I am a new pharmacist from UNMC College of Pharmacy, and I serve as the Executive Fellow for the Nebraska Pharmacists Association. I also serve as a pharmacist for Madonna Rehab and the Vice President of the Board for the Nebraska Obesity Society, but I will be here representing the Pharmacists Association. I offer this testimony on behalf of LB 436. LB 436, as Senator Geist mentioned, updates the Nebraska Uniform Controlled Substances Act, which will conform the state's controlled substances schedule to the federal level. I apologize for this technical review, but we'll go through kind of each drug here. And as we go through the schedule, Schedules 1 having no currently accepted medical use in the United States, lack of accepted safety, and high potential for abuse. As we work our way to 5, the potential for abuse increases. So on page 6, we will add designer drugs, street drugs, which are chemically and structurally related to fentanyl. Page 8 adds item numbered methoxetamine, also known as Mexi. This drug is structurally and dissociative anesthetics such as ketamine and phencyclidine as well. Page 14 adds Zypeprol. This is an opioid drug with some hallucinogenic properties. Page 19 adds ammoneptine, and this drug is a nervous system stimulant. Page 20 adds N-phenyl-N, also known as mesocarb, and this drug is a nervous system stimulant as well. So these are our Schedule 1 medication or drugs. There's 5 of them. As we go to Schedule 4, this adds on page 32 Daridorexant, brand name Qvavic. This is an FDA-approved medication that is used for adults that have trouble falling asleep or staying asleep. This medication is similar to other sleep assistance medications that are already on the market, such as Lemborexant, brand name Dayvigo, and Suvorexant, brand named Belsomra. Our last drug is Schedule 5 on page 37. This adds Ganaloxone, brand name Zoltami. This is an FDA-approved drug used for treatment for a certain type of seizures. The Nebraska Pharmacists Association would respectfully request that this committee advance LB 436 for consideration by the full legislature. This bill would harmonize Nebraska's controlled substances schedules and the federal controlled substances schedules. This will not be more restrictive than the current federal controlled substances schedule. And at this time, I'd be happy to address any questions that you have.
Senator DeBoer.
Thank you, Chair Wayne. Are these fentanyl-related substances? I feel like we're hearing a lot more about fentanyl and fentanyl-derived substances lately. Is this a new thing, or why? What, can you answer that? Are these new designer drugs that we hadn't seen before, or?
Yes. So with what we'd like to call our bathtub chemists, when you were to if you have a base core structure of the fentanyl and you add basically like a side group to it and you modify it a little bit, that's technically a different drug. So when we include all these designer drugs and structurally related compounds to the fentanyl, then they can be new or some of the older drugs. So as you modulate it and modify it, they do become new and different.
How long has fentanyl been on the Schedule 1?
It's been on there for a while.
For a long time.
Yeah. I can get you the exact.
No,
date.
that's fine. That'd be great, but
Yeah.
also you don't have to. Thank you so much for this bill. Thank you.
Of course, thank you.
I have a question. So is there anything in this bill that's not on the federal level?
All these are currently on the federal level right now. And then with our, so these are scheduled on the federal level, but they do not mirror Nebraska's level right now.
No, what I'm saying is anything in this bill that is not on the federal.
That I am not sure of. I do not think so, but I'll get back to you on that.
Okay, thank you. Seeing no more questions, thank you for being here. Next proponent. Proponent. Next, we'll turn to opponents. Any opponents? Anyone testifying in a neutral capacity? Seeing none. Senator Geist, you can come back up.
Wait, is there a testifier? Did somebody want to testify?
No.
No? Anyone? Okay. It's like an auction. You don't want to raise your hand because.
Right. For the record, we received one letter of support. Senator Geist.
And I'm just here, I would have waived closing, but I'm just here to answer your question, Senator Wayne. And there is nothing on the bill that's not being updated on the federal schedule. So it's completely mirroring what we don't have currently federally and need to match the federal schedule.
Okay. That answers that. Any
Okay.
other questions? Seeing none.
All right.
That closes the hearing on LB 436, and we will open the hearing on LB 22 and LB 634. I will say for this hearing, if you are testifying in favor of one or in neutral of another one, or in favor of one or against another one, please let the vice chair or the board know, and we'll give you an extra minute to be able to talk on both bills. We'll start with Senator McKinney.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Vice Chair DeBoer and members of the Judiciary Committee. My name is Terrell McKinney, TerrellMcKinney, and I represent District 11, North Omaha. We are here today to discuss LB 634 to adopt the Cannabis Control Act and the Cannabis Conviction Clean Slate Act, which creates the Cannabis Conviction Clean Slate Act. The Cannabis Control Act legalizes the cultivation, manufacturing, sale, possession, and use of recreational marijuana. It creates and funds a regulatory body tasked with overseeing activities conducted under the Act. It provides for civil and criminal penalties for violations of the Act. The Cannabis Conviction Clean Slate Act creates a procedure for individuals convicted of crimes involving the use and possession of cannabis and cannabis products to have those convictions removed from their criminal record. The Marijuana Tax Act of 1937 essentially banned it nationwide despite objections from the American Medical Association related to medical usage. This act came just a year after the film Reefer Madness warned that everyone was going to go crazy because of weed. Up until Americans and Europeans could buy, Americans and Europeans could buy cannabis extracts in pharmacies and doctor offices to help with stomach aches, migraines, inflation, insomnia, and other ailments. The federal government and states continued to increase punishments related to marijuana until the late 1960s, when the laws began to touch white upper middle class college students who were smoking the drug. During the mid-1970s, virtually all states softened penalties for marijuana possession. Still, the federal government continues to cling on, as it does today, to a policy that it has origins in racism, xenophobia, and whose principal effect has been to ruin the lives of many generations of people. The war on drugs has always had a disproportionate effect on Black Americans. Black Americans are 4 times more likely to be arrested for cannabis charges than white Americans, even though whites are equally likely to sell and use cannabis. Although the states are making progress towards decriminalization and legalization of cannabis, the disparities seem to be increasing. Cannabis prohibition causes more problems than it solves, and ruins thousands more lives than it supposedly tries to save. More than 600,000 individuals are arrested per year enforcing cannabis prohibition. Of these arrests, people of color and young people are dominant. This total surpasses the total number of arrests for all violent crimes combined, including murder, rape, robbery, and aggravated assault. Just like alcohol, cannabis will come with issues. But just like alcohol, those issues can be managed by responsible adults. We should not jump to the conclusion that dispensaries are crime-generating hotspots. We can find a common ground between safety and access to cannabis through the regulation of these markets. As quoted by President Biden, sending people to prison for possession of marijuana has upended too many lives and incarcerated people for conduct that many states no longer prohibit. Criminal records for marijuana possession have also imposed needless barriers to employment, housing, and educational opportunities. The president isn't the only elected official to express such sentiments. Governors and other elected officials have taken similar actions. Many of the incarcerated individuals were convicted of having a small amount of cannabis. Although they did their time, the record is still there. Cannabis policy must include comprehensive efforts to help the communities that have been ravaged by the war on drugs. Legalization doesn't undo past arrests. There must be ways in which policy can help those most impacted. Clean slate laws give many a second chance at decent jobs, supporting their families, housing, and overall livelihoods. With the clean slate laws, we eliminate barriers by offering relief from systematic measures that have kept so many behind and introduced them to a life where past mistakes will no longer define their futures. We can give them a shot at redemption. It is important to remember those affected most by these laws, primarily communities of color, although usage is comparable, as stated prior, in affluent communities and those communities in which law enforcement, county attorneys, and judges come from. A lot of their kids and a lot of them smoke cannabis, use cannabis. Providing clean slate relief in a pathway to benefit them economically. Because I could go on my phone right now, I could pull it out, go to Robinhood or whatever app and purchase cannabis right now in this hearing. But we have many men and women in our state and in our country that are sitting inside of county jails and prisons because of marijuana cannabis offenses. But it's really crazy that I can pull out my phone and purchase cannabis right now. It's sad. According to Gallup polls, more than 2/3 of Americans support legalizing cannabis for adult use. State by state polling shows majority support in every single state. Yet only 21 states and DC have passed laws to legalize and regulate cannabis for individuals over 21. Those states that have legalized cannabis are blue, red, and purple. In neighboring states like Colorado, cannabis is legal for adults and is taxed and regulated similarly to alcohol. The state also has a medical cannabis law. This bill adds a sales tax that is to be levied on sales of cannabis by cannabis stores to consumers at a rate of 15%, with the proceeds credited the same way as the excise tax discussed above. According to the Department of Revenue in our state, and you can look at the fiscal note, so it started in 23-24 with the property tax cash fund, there would be a little over a $14 million benefit. By 2026, that rises up to almost $73.5 million. Affordable Housing Trust Fund would see an increase of almost $2 million, and by 2026-27, a little over $9 million. The Department of Health and Human Services would see almost a $2 million increase, and by 2026, a little over a $9 million increase. And as I close, I know many people are going to come up and say, we need to wait on the FDA to approve it. We got to follow federal laws and all these type of things that we heard earlier during the medical discussion. And one hand, one day people want to have state control and local control But when it comes to this, we want to wait on the federal government. But when it comes to other issues, it's no, states should have control, and states should be able to enforce these laws on their own. Then when it comes to this topic, it's, oh, let's wait on the feds. Let's not do anything. Let's not break the laws. But in the past, we had elected officials that wanted to purchase drugs to kill people by the death penalty. Where was the thought to follow the law then? And just honestly, marijuana laws are racist, have always been racist, and were enacted because of racism, and it has affected Black, Brown, Native communities the most, and you see that in our prison populations. And that's strongly why I think these laws should be changed. Records should be cleared, and people that have been harmed by these policies should be able to benefit from them going forward. Thank you.
Are there any questions? Oh. Are there any questions for Senator McKinney? Yes, Senator
Quick one.
DK.
Senator McKinney, with this right now, cannabis is a legal drug. With this act that you're proposing, does it, at this point in time, does it offer counseling to help people so that they can not, if it's clear in their slate, does it also help them where they will be able to get off of the use of cannabis as it is as a recreational drug now?
If we have to throw that in the bill to work in some language to provide some resources to help people not use, I'm all for it. I'm not, and it's trying to pass this isn't to say I think everybody should be utilizing cannabis and it's for everybody. I just fundamentally think it being prohibited is a problem. And I'm not saying it's for everybody, because everything isn't for everybody. But if you want to work in some language where we try to provide some resources or take something from the revenue to help with prevention, I'm all for it.
Well, I understand where you're coming with the clean slate. So if we take it one step farther to help them get on so they can be back on their jobs, supporting their family and doing what they need, I think that's where the counseling part would come in.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions from the committee? I don't see any. Senator Wayne, we'll hear from you to open on LB 634. Welcome to your Judiciary Committee.
Good afternoon, Vice Chair, Senator Geist. My name is Justin Wayne, JUSTINWAYNE, and I represent Legislative District 13, which is North Omaha, Northeast Douglas County. I'm here today to introduce LB 22, which will decriminalize the possession and use of marijuana. I've introduced this bill in part because I believe we actually need to have a conversation about possession and what those penalties carry with possession, particularly around marijuana versus fentanyl. I think those are two different types of drugs that we should have two different penalties for. But I also want to just bring some knowledge around the idea of legalization of marijuana. And although both attempts to put it on the ballot kind of didn't work, it seems like it's always been a tug of war between the right or the left, or rich or the poor, and it just seems to keep going on forever. But to me, this is just about personal responsibility. I have long heard the legitimate complaints about the nanny state, but that same philosophy applies here. We know that if there's going to be some abuse, that just is no different than painkillers, no different than alcohol, but at the same time, you have to take personal responsibility. So rather than keep hopping through the practical issues and things like that, this bill is just saying, let's have a conversation about decriminalizing marijuana, and then what that looks like going forward, I think, is another conversation around LB 634. But my bill does not really go into that far of detail. But marijuana, this drug, has countless of names throughout history, commonly referred to as cannabis, weed, ganja, ragweed, ditchweed, and keep going on. but back in the day, it was just hemp up until the 1930s, where this rebrand of marijuana came into existence from really our political leaders who were targeting certain groups, whether it be African American, Mexican immigrants, Native Americans, or just in certain individuals. It was a lot of racial and classism undertones as we move to the word marijuana. The history of hemp is well documented in our American history, along with Mexican immigrants and Native American history. And as part of that, it was easy to identify and, I would say, discriminate against those individuals. The first, even from our first permanent English settler in Jamestown, Virginia, hemp was recorded, I think, back in 1916, over 400 years ago. A century and a half later, George Washington and Thomas Jefferson both grew hemp on their land, and John Adams even wrote about crops, the hemp crop, and many uses. George Washington explicitly questioned the medical uses of the plant in his journals in 1765. I say all that to say that by 1840, cannabis, ragweed, all of that was widespread throughout our societies. And in fact, one of our first opioid epidemics to hit America was during the Civil War. And oftentimes hemp and what we now call marijuana, cannabis, was used to deal with the addiction that veterans were having coming back from the Civil War with painkillers. By 1860, Vanity Fair was actually advertising hash products in publications. So the widespread of cannabis was used prior to 1920. It wasn't a political issue, and it sure wasn't any kind of stigma in our society. It was simply something that people used and used properly and used for personal reasons. Both Andrew Jackson and Franklin Pierce wrote about smoking hash with the troops, and later smoking cannabis was about the only thing good during his service during the Mexican-American War. The entire prohibition on cannabis came about the same time as the alcohol. We found out the alcohol wasn't going to work, so they still kept pushing the cannabis prohibition. And the reason between the difference was it had 100% to do with the Mexican immigrants, African Americans, and Native Americans who hemp was a part of their culture. If you think about it, in the 1930s, it was called the jazz drug. It was the jazz drug because most of the time it was in Harlem and New Orleans, and which were heavily African American cities at the time and areas at the time. That's really the reason, in my opinion, that the era of marijuana was started to be a Schedule I drug along with heroin and LSD. I mean, even we talk about the marijuana tax that was passed in 1937. And when you look at how this legislation was done, and I just want to bring this up for historical purposes because I'm a kind of a history nerd, it was done at the 11th hour. And the term marijuana, because it was so new, confused half of the Congress and the Senate during the time of what it was, because most of them knew it to be hemp or ragweed or something like that. And this term marijuana was being thrown around, and they were like, it must be some kind of narcotic. Republican Minority Leader Schnell asked, why is this a matter we should be bringing up in this late hour? I know nothing about the bill. He was assured by Representative Sam Rayburn from Texas that it's probably a good bill, but he wasn't sure, saying it has something to do with narcotics of some kind. That's literally how we first started our prohibition on marijuana. So after all of that and the failed war on drugs, you have to turn to our fiscal note to know that from 2019 to 2022, there were 322 admissions to the Nebraska Department of Correction for, at least in part, marijuana-related offenses. What's interesting about that number is if you break down the number a little bit further, you'll find that it's 4-to-1 ratio of African Americans against all other ethnicities. So there still seems to be some disparity that exists. I know this is an interesting debate. It'll have a lot of conversations around it. There'll be people who oppose this for the same reasons as earlier. But I do think from a committee's purpose, when we're talking about reducing prison populations and reducing offenses, we have to have a conversation around marijuana and what those scheduled drugs look like. And with that, I will answer any questions.
Are there questions for Senator Wayne? I do not see any.
Thank you.
Let's have our first proponent testifier.
Good afternoon. My name is Jerry Moeller, Jerrymoler. I testified earlier on the medical cannabis bill. I'd like to speak to this one again. I was part of the team that changed the law in 1978. We took cannabis possession from a felony to a civil infraction. If you go back and look at the history of that, it was a pretty open and shut thing. We only had one opposing senator that voted against that bill. I'd like to tell you about one of the people that we had at a symposium in Omaha in 1978. She was the OB/GYN professor from Drake University. We asked her to come and testify at our symposium about the safety and efficacy of cannabis. And what she told us was pretty shocking. We didn't know at the time, but she revealed to us that the cannabinoids that we find in cannabis are also produced by our own body. And some of those cannabinoids are actually found in mother's milk. And I don't know if you all are aware of that or not, but those cannabinoids help the child with their digestive system. It helps calm them when they're upset and cranky. Several benefits from it. It helps them sleep and get good rest. And those are all provided by the mother's milk. Those cannabinoids are produced by her body. So the professor told us that as far as the safety of a pregnant woman using cannabinoids was not a problem with her. She did not see a problem with a pregnant woman using cannabis as a medicine because our body doesn't see cannabis as a foreign object. It doesn't try to repel it. It's why you can be drug tested for it 30 days after using it and it's still in your system. With that being said, I think we are way overdue of passing some kind of safe legal access in Nebraska. Our neighbors have all done it. It's here. It's not going away. I'm not going away unless I die. I've been at this since 1977. I'm going to continue to do this until I become successful and we free the people of Nebraska from this very oppressive, very racist, very greedy law. Thank you.
Are there any questions for this testifier? Thank you for your testimony. Next proponent.
Hello. I'm here to talk to you guys today, and I'm here, thank you, Senator DeBoer, for inviting us and all of the committee. My name is Rachel Nelson, RACHAEL-NELSON, and I'm here today representing the Libertarian Party of Nebraska in support of LB 634. I'm a political activist, a mother, and someone who suffers from PTSD. Since the early 60s, a vast number of studies have been conducted on the health benefits and healing properties of marijuana consumption. Some studies have even been able to show that marijuana attacks as well as helps to prevent cancer cells from growing. Many of the doctors I have spoken to in the state have said they'd be willing to prescribe marijuana in place of opioids and medications used for mental illness because of the low risk of addiction and lack of side effects. Another positive impact marijuana could have in our state is our agricultural industry, which we rely heavily on. Farmers across the state would be able to cultivate marijuana for medicinal and recreational use, as well as be able to sell this cash crop in stores where it can be tested and checked for potency. The process and ingredients alleviate the concerns of laced or unhealthy products. Packaging can easily be made to childproof to make it incredibly hard for minors to get a hold of any items containing THC. Laws can be put into place that require the flour and many paraphernalia to be stored in the trunk. The containers that come must stay sealed until they've reached your home, much like alcohol. There are many ways to ensure the safety and concern of our communities. The bill also recognizes the people who are incarcerated for possession and paraphernalia charges. This section of the bill is very important for those people and their families to be given the ability to return to life without judgment once they've completed their requirements, allowing the chance to succeed and be productive members of our society. Our systems are overburdened. Our police officers and corrections officers are exhausted. Removing marijuana from the controlled substance list would ease up the stress on our system, our jails, and our servicemen and women by reducing the time spent on victimless crimes. Nebraska has looked long and hard for a drop in property taxes, and a tax on marijuana is a fairly obvious answer. Colorado brought in enough money to fully fund their school system within the first year of legalization.
Washington State brought in over $559 million in legal income in 2021 alone. Due to these reasons and many more, I do not see how this bill could do anything but pass. We have seen the amounts of legal income increase exponentially and the numbers of crimes related to drugs diminish across the board in the states that have already legalized marijuana. The statistics, the science, and the facts show that we are behind the times, and it is past time Nebraska gets on board with this legalization measure. Thank you. I'd be willing to answer any questions.
Thank you for your testimony. Are there any questions from the committee? I do not see any today.
Thank you,
for being
guys.
here. Let's have our next proponent testifier.
Hello, Chairman and Senators. Thanks for allowing me to speak here today. My name is Dave Kendall, D-A-V-E-K-E-N-D-L-E. I'm here as a proponent for LB 22. I'm also the county chair of the Libertarian Party of Seward County. I have a short personal anecdote. Approximately 50 years ago, a girlfriend and I were driving to Omaha in my then 66 Ford Mustang. Got pulled over by the Sarpy County Sheriff, who then searched the car and found a small amount of marijuana in my glove box and handcuffed me, put me in the back, and took me to jail. I was 16 at the time. Anyway, it's time to recognize that the criminalization of marijuana has done far more damage to society and to the individuals in it than having it legal ever could have. From ruining people's lives through arrest and incarceration, to fueling black markets and violent criminal gang activity, to billions in tax dollars spent to fight the problems criminalization has created, to the individual rights it has caused to be violated along the way. Criminalization has benefited absolutely no one except possibly criminals. Please advance LB 22 for a vote for the entire legislature.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Are there any questions? I do not see any. Thank you so much for being here. Next proponent.
Hi.
Welcome.
My name is David Swartz, D-A-V-I-D-S-W-A-R-T-S. And I'm from Palmyra, Nebraska, and I can tell you that 10 or 12 years ago, I would have been an opponent here. So I do understand where people are coming from that are hesitant or opposed to it, because that's where I came from. And it took my son-in-law dying of brain cancer to get me to open my mind and do research. So I've been doing for about 10 years. I'm testifying in support of LB 22. The cannabis market in Nebraska is alive and thriving. The supply is plentiful and easy to access. Where there is demand, there will be a supply. Addressing the black market thing, if there's a cheaper, if it's overtaxed and the black market is cheaper, that's where people will buy it. Overtaxing is the problem there. Prohibitionists must understand that prohibition isn't working, hasn't worked, and never will work. Prohibition guarantees market for cartels, the mafia, and street gangs. Cannabis is not dangerous. Buying from the cartel is, and unfortunately, police actions to enforce the war on drugs can also be dangerous. LB 22, allowing for the decriminalization of cannabis, does not lend itself to the slippery slope excuse. It does not depend on approval of our broken FDA. It does not limit medical conditions, does not require legislators to make medical decisions about the use of cannabis suggested by a doctor to his patient. As of today, 38 states have medical cannabis programs, and 18 states have allowed personal use for adults, including those without medical cards. Decriminalization of cannabis would allow personal growth as well, cutting out the big marijuana companies and the black market. Nebraskans are ready to make it happen. And I think a decriminalization petition would go over very good in Nebraska at this time.
Thank you for your testimony. Are there any questions from the committee? Thank you for being here. Next proponent testifier.
Good afternoon, Chairman DeBoer, Vice Chairman DeBoer, members of the Judiciary Committee. My name is Bill Hawkins, BILLHAWKINS. I'm a lifelong Nebraska resident. I'm the director of Nebraska Hemp Company, which has been working for years to reform unjust cannabis laws. I also have 50 years of practical real-life cannabis experience. And so I've been through and was there when President Nixon signed the war on drugs. So I have lived the war on drugs, and it isn't working. Right now, the price of cannabis here in Nebraska has dropped because there's a surplus in other states. My message to you I'm here in support of LB 634. We need a tax and regulated cannabis economy here in Nebraska. It allows local businesses to produce a safe, tested product that can be used by adults, checked with licenses, and provide a safe product for the community. There are cannabis users, 10 to 20%. That's 200 to 400,000 Nebraskans are using cannabis right now today. My message is it's time to start taxing and regulating the long-haired, tie-dyed, pot-smoking hippies and other cannabis consumers here in this state. Missouri now is recreational. If anybody goes down to Kansas City, Missouri for a weekend, can buy the largest amount allowed in the states now, 3 ounces of cannabis they can buy right now and bring back. By taxing and regulating it, we are taking it away from the black market. The fiscal note estimates $34 million in tax revenue. You are keeping that in the hands of the black market, the cartel, hardworking drug dealers. And instead of putting it in a safe tax and regulated society. So I would ask you to really look at LB 634. It is very strict, it is very detailed, and it gives Nebraska a chance to stand up and accept the fact that the war on drugs has not worked, and it's time to end the prohibition of this plant. The testimony, one last thought, the testimony this morning in the medical issue of the safety and about this plant applies to recreational cannabis. So I want to thank you for your time, and I would be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you for your testimony. Are there any questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next proponent testifier.
Good afternoon, Senator DeBoer and members of the committee. I'm Joe Nigro, that's Joenigro, and I'm testifying in support of LB 22 and LB 634 as a private citizen. I worked as a public defender for 39 years, so I've seen firsthand the devastating effects of the failed war on drugs, especially marijuana. I want to thank Senator Wayne and Senator McKinney for introducing these bills. Did prohibition work? That's the question we should all ask when considering whether to keep marijuana illegal. Prohibition was an incredible failure. It turned millions of Americans into criminals because they consumed alcohol occasionally, and it was the beginning of large-scale organized crime in America. Our country realized that prohibition was a mistake and repealed it. We've done We have done the same thing with marijuana, turning millions of Americans into criminals and giving the opportunity for organized crime to make millions of dollars. All of this for a substance that is not nearly as harmful as alcohol. And the prohibition of marijuana has been especially harmful to Black people. Although Black people and white people use marijuana at similar rates nationally and statewide, Black people are 3 times as likely to be arrested or cited for marijuana offenses. In Lancaster County, Black people are nearly 7 times as likely to be cited or arrested for marijuana, and we're not even the worst county. Convictions for marijuana offenses not only result in fines and jail, but also ineligibility for federal student loans and housing. All of this for a substance with the same dependency rate as caffeine, 9%. The dependency rate for alcohol is 15.4%. For cocaine, 16.7%. For heroin, 23.1%. And for tobacco, 31.9%. Tobacco is far more addictive and harmful than marijuana, but no one is clamoring to make tobacco illegal. We've reduced usage of tobacco through education and regulation. Let's do the same with marijuana. I heard the last governor of Colorado say that after Colorado legalized marijuana, the only age group where usage increased was people over 65. Whether that was baby boomers returning to their youth or old people having more aches and pains to treat is unclear. States that have made marijuana legal have actually seen a decrease in use by teenagers. Dispensaries don't sell to people who are underage, and legalization has decreased Black market sales. Legalization would also lead to a reduction in violent crime. We've seen home invasion robberies that have resulted in shootings. People rob marijuana dealers because they know they have marijuana, they have cash, and they won't report the robbery. Sometimes violence results. The Black market will shrink with legalization and with legal dispensaries, which are difficult to rob. This reduction in violent crime is another benefit of legalization. Eventually, the people of Nebraska are going to vote to legalize marijuana. It makes more sense for this body to legalize it and set up a system of regulation and taxation at the same time instead of waiting until after the people vote. LB 634 includes provisions that much of the revenue would go for property tax relief, the tax people complain about the most. For all of these reasons, I urge the committee to merge these bills and advance them. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Are there questions from the committee for Mr. Nigro? Senator Decay.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Can you expound a little bit why, when you say that tobacco is more harmful than what marijuana is?
Well, it's obviously, the addiction rate is much, much higher. When you look at the numbers of Americans who suffer from cancer and other diseases related to smoke, emphysema, that would be far greater than the number of people who are harmed by addiction to marijuana.
With that, why would it be any more harmful when you're still inhaling the same type of smoke into your lungs and stuff? Wouldn't that be just as detrimental to lung cancer as what tobacco would be?
Well, I think the difference is that people who are using marijuana don't use it at the same rate that people smoke cigarettes. People, it's not uncommon for somebody who's using cigarettes to smoke a pack a day. People aren't going to smoke 20 joints a day. That's just not, that doesn't happen.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Are there any other questions for this testifier? I do not see any. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
We'll take our next proponent testifier.
Good afternoon, Vice Chair DeBoer, members of the committee. My name is Spike Eicholt, S-P-I-K-E-E-I-C-K-H-O-L-T. I'm appearing on behalf of the ACLU Nebraska and the Nebraska Criminal Defense Attorneys Association in support of both LBs 22 and 634. I want to thank both senators for introducing these bills. You've got a copy of my written testimony. I'm not going to read from that. You've also got a copy of one is a report that the ACLU of Nebraska issued in 2020. I think Mr. Nigro quoted from some of those findings, specifically that in Nebraska, Black people are 3 times more likely to be arrested and cited with a marijuana charge than white folks. And then also attached to that article is a news article that kind of talked about the sort of the current disparity of charging in Lancaster County for simple possession of marijuana that I wanted to kind of talk about because it's something that no one's really mentioned. When this state provided for industrial hemp, that created a shift in the law on the prosecution of marijuana. Right now, it used to be for years that for the state to charge somebody with marijuana, a police officer can simply show up to court and say, I've looked at that, I smell it, that's marijuana. But with the creation of the industrial hemp exception to marijuana and cannabis, the state now has to show a certain THC level in the marijuana itself. To Pat Condon's credit and to Lancaster County attorneys, they no longer charge simple possession of marijuana unless they actually get a test result that shows that. Unfortunately, that's not the same for our city attorney. They continue to charge simple possession of fraction level marijuana. And that causes a disparate treatment of people within this jurisdiction. I just wanted to kind of put that on the record. Both these bills are good because they deal with addressing either outright decriminalization of marijuana or in the instance of LB 634, some sort of regulatory scheme to provide for some sort of regulation instead of just outright criminalization of marijuana. Both of these are good. I just want to say one thing that no one's mentioned before. Maybe somebody mentioned it this morning when you heard the medical marijuana bill, and Senator Wayne alluded to this before. Whether you like marijuana or not, at some point, there's moneyed interests that want to legalize marijuana throughout the country. They can fund petition drives, they can fund ballot initiatives and referendum questions, and they can eventually get something that's going to get on the ballot, and they're not going to be able to have the court strike it anymore. And at that point, the polls show consistently that the people in the state want cannabis legal in some form. You may not like the forms of these bills, but ultimately what might happen is that the voters are just going to approve something that you really don't like, and then they're going to be stuck with it. Just like now you've got a couple of bills to try to roll back what happened with minimum wage, just like the gambling the year session before, just like minimum wage in 2014, and just like there's something else, I can't remember what it was, that the voters approved that this legislature is just then forced to deal with. That might be done to you as well when it comes to cannabis. I don't say that as a threat, I'm just putting it out there. We all know what's going to happen. They were close to having it on the ballot just a couple of years ago. And I'll answer any questions if anyone has any.
Are there any questions from the committee? I have a question for you.
Sure.
If the state decriminalizes marijuana, could it then be charged within our jurisdiction as a federal crime, or is there a federal crime of marijuana possession?
I think there still is a federal crime because you'll probably hear the opponents say that it's not been decriminalized at the federal level. I'll tell you just anecdotally, the federal authorities here in Nebraska rarely charge possession of marijuana or delivery of marijuana cases. When I first started doing criminal offense, sometimes if you had somebody who would be caught on the interstate or something with just several 100 pounds of marijuana, sometimes those cases would go federal, but that hasn't happened. At least I have not heard directly. Go federal means the federal government picks up the charges. I've not heard that happen at all. But they technically still could, I suppose. And to expound a bit, I suppose it's possible. You know, you see all these CBD shops. I don't admittedly know what authority they're able to run these things now. I suppose at some point, some authority could try to somehow charge folks for doing that. I don't know.
And you said that I think the Lancaster County attorney does not charge simple possession anymore.
That's right. Generally speaking, their policy is, and I think in the article, actually Pat Connor's quoted, and I think they take it from a practical, and I can't speak for him, and he certainly wouldn't like me to, but I think from a practical and perhaps a somewhat ethical position that they have, that is, possession of marijuana, first offense, even second offenses, in a fraction level, you're just going to get a fine. You're not going to get an attorney appointed to you because you're not looking at jail unless your family hires one. They're not going to know, perhaps, that they have a defense, if you will, that yes, you were found with some cannabis, but they don't have a lab report to show that it's got more than 0.03% of THC in it. So Pat Connor's office, I think he's kind of quoted as saying, essentially, is that they're not going to charge those. That's just not right. They don't have a lab report. They're not going to pay for these $100 or I think it's $300, $400 fine level crimes to send off for a lab report to the state lab and wait several weeks to come back for it. They're just not going to do that. The city attorney continues to charge cases as if nothing's different.
That was actually my next question, because when I was a senior certified law student here in Lincoln, I worked in the criminal clinic, which was the prosecution side, and we charged a lot of possession of marijuana.
Right.
And it was $100 fine then.
Right.
That kind of aging myself. What is it now, do you think?
Well, if I remember right,
Infraction?
don't get corrected. For possession of marijuana, first offense infraction is $300 fine. Second offense is $400 fine, 0 to 5 days jail. And third offense is $500 fine, 0 to 7 days jail.
So if you have a $300 fine, ostensibly somebody who has enough money can pay it. They pay it like a speeding ticket.
Right.
It's done, whatever. If they don't have enough money, what happens to them?
But you're generally not arrested for the crime itself because it's infraction level. You're going to be cited and released. But say you go to court and you plead, judge, I'll plead guilty, $300 fine. Okay, I want to do a time payment plan. I can pay the rest of it in 6 weeks' time. And they don't pay in 6 weeks' time. There's a date that's entered where they either promise to pay by that date or appear and explain why they didn't pay and ask for more time. Almost will always happen. They won't show up. If they don't have the money, they won't show up for the pay to appear date. Then they'll be arrested on that warrant. And then many times they'll just opt, when they get arrested in jail, to simply sit out that fine. We have this statutory fiction that you earn sort of $150 a day sitting in jail that could be applied toward fines and court costs. And so it's not uncommon for them to sit in the jail for a day or two just to satisfy that debt.
So they'll sit in jail to pay off this infraction because they can't afford to do it if they don't have the money.
That can happen, yeah. You may remember that this committee and the legislature did change the law to provide for an option where people could pay a portion of it or do community service an option. So sometimes judges will do that. But there still is the option if you don't do any of those things, the state's eventually going to have you arrested and you have to deal with it somehow.
And in the meantime, we have to go through, because I don't know if they're still having, free legal help of senior certified law students who are supervised still by an attorney. But in the meantime, they have sort of several steps to get through the bench warrant and all of the different things there. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the committee? All right, thank you. Next proponent. Anybody else here to testify in favor of the bill? Then we'll go to the first opponent. Welcome.
It's me again. Good afternoon, Vice Chair DeBoer, members of the Judiciary Committee. My name is Colonel John Bolduc, John Bolduc, Superintendent, Nebraska State Patrol. I'm here today on behalf of the State Patrol to oppose LB 22 and LB 634. My testimony is limited to LB 22. This removes all legal consequences for the possession or distribution of any amount of marijuana or marijuana products. As a career law enforcement officer with 36 years of experience, I'm unfortunately all too familiar with the unintended consequences of legalizing or decriminalizing any form of marijuana. I want to focus on the harm that Nebraskans will experience as a result of LB 22. Unique to this bill is a dangerous blanket decriminalization of marijuana without any restrictions regarding even a minimum age for possession, location of use, or amounts. While such restrictions would not eliminate the dangers of marijuana, it is worth noting that there is no other federally controlled substance for which Nebraska fails to maintain restrictions regarding its use. This includes drugs ranging from Tylenol with codeine to Ativan. Even legend drugs are regulated with very specific requirements for the prescriptions. Nebraskans may not even keep prescription drugs in containers other than the originals. Yet under LB 22, marijuana is simply decriminalized. Such decriminalization may result in a flood of federally controlled substances with no accepted medical use onto Nebraska streets without any ability to govern, without ability the state to protect innocent Nebraskans from the ill effects. We know that marijuana affects a user's central nervous system and greatly impairs the ability to operate a motor vehicle and perform other complex tasks. Marijuana drug driving offenses are notoriously difficult to prove, as science has provided no established safe level of marijuana for operating a motor vehicle. The absence of a THC cutoff amount for driving fails to protect innocent motorists from the dangers posed by marijuana users behind the wheel of a car. In 2021, Colorado had 162 cannabis-involved fatalities with drivers who tested positive for THC. That is a 138% increase since legalization in 2013. The danger posed by the decriminalization of marijuana will be felt by all Nebraskans, from children who will be able to access the drug to innocent drivers on our roads. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to testify. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions? I have a couple for you.
Sure.
So first, I just want to clarify that you're against both bills. You're
That's
in
correct.
opposition to both
That's
bills. And LB 22 has no driving restrictions. I actually haven't read them enough to know if 634 does.
There's no minimum, like, percentage of THC in the bloodstream, any of those things.
Okay. And this is just a question that I have, I don't know the answer to, maybe you do, I'm sure you do. Are there restrictions on other drugs like opioids or things like that with driving?
There are, but what we have to prove, because every drug impacts the body differently, we have to prove impairment. That's where the drug recognition expert training comes in. So what we're seeing, what we have to demonstrate for the court is that the person was impaired. And that's through a variety of techniques that we have on the roadside, or through a blood test that typically shows a combination, alcohol and drugs. But again, we have to demonstrate impairment. In alcohol, of course, you know that 0.08 or more is considered impairment legally. That's measurable, easily measured. It's much more difficult for drugs, including marijuana.
So if there are other drugs and someone demonstrates impairment, I assume through field sobriety tests and the like, then you're able to prosecute it regardless of whether they've met some standard percentage or level in the blood or something like that?
That's correct, Senator. Of course, we would effect an arrest on probable cause, then it's up to the prosecutor to prove
Yes,
that case.
sorry. Nice. I got sloppy there. So from your perspective, is marijuana demonstrably different than other drugs for which you would have to sort of use these field sobriety tests for?
It is. Now, in all fairness, I'm not a drug recognition expert, but I do employ many of them. And during that training, they are looking for different physiological symptoms. You know, are the pupils dilated? Are they constricted? There's blood pressure. There's certain behaviors that they exhibit, depending on the type of drug that they're under the influence of. Meth is much different than marijuana, much different than opioids.
Sure. So would you be able to develop a system for identifying impairment under marijuana the same way that you've done it for other drugs? That's what I'm trying to get at.
Sure. You know, what would be great is if there was a system, a reliable scientific method to determine level of impairment of marijuana like we have with alcohol. That doesn't exist yet.
Is there that reliable system for opioids, for example?
No, again, we have to rely on drug recognition experts and, blood tests. Unfortunately, most of those come, after the fact, after there's been an accident, an arrest, even a fatality, things like that.
So I really just want to know, is there a difference then between marijuana and other drugs for purposes of determining whether or not you can determine on the roadside whether someone has had an impairment because of the drug?
That's a great question, Senator. Again, when the drug recognition experts are evaluating the person, they're trying to determine, are they impaired to the point that they shouldn't be operating a motor vehicle? Okay, then we have to prove that. They're not going to be able to differentiate unless they have an admission or some other evidence as there's drugs in the car. Like, is their central nervous system depressed because of opioids? Or is it depressed because they've been consuming marijuana? Things like that.
So the objection then to LB 22 and 634 about not having a standardized way to identify whether someone's impaired because of drug use for the purposes of driving, wouldn't that apply to all sorts of other legal drugs like prescription drugs and things like that?
I want to make sure I understand your question, Senator.
Yeah.
So, we certainly don't want people operating motor vehicles or any machinery under any drugs.
Sure.
Okay, they're difficult to prove, difficult to detect. If we legalize marijuana, just a blanket legalization, which these bills do, then we have much more widespread incidents of people operating machinery, including motor vehicles, under the influence. It's been proven by other states that have gone down this road before us.
So I guess then you're saying that other substances, other drugs, opiates, et cetera, are controlled in some manner when they're done, and that limits the amount that you see around and would limit the problems from having no very accurate way of determining.
I guess in a way, Senator, I would agree with that, but what we're talking about is the accessibility, right? So we know that the market has been flooded with fentanyl, for example, artificial pills in powder form, disguised as other things. As that has permeated the country, we're seeing a great deal of impairment as a result of that, and or some tragedies as a result. You increase the supply and the availability of marijuana through initiatives like this, you're going to see more crashes, more fatal crashes, those kind of things.
Just a numbers game.
Yes.
Got it. Okay. Are there other questions?
I do.
Oh, yeah, I see.
And I
Senator
wasn't
Geist.
here this morning. I hope I'm not beating a dead horse asking this question. But I wonder if you would respond on your experience with the black market.
Yes, Senator, thank you. We did cover that ad nauseum this morning, but
Did
I'll be
you?
happy to talk
Sorry.
to that again. So the black market is alive and well in states that have legal marijuana and in states that have illegal marijuana. I believe one of the testifiers suggested that it's easy to access and it's affordable. That's true. I worked in California for several years, both when it was only a medical marijuana state, and then actually right when I left, it became fully legalized. What we saw there is diversion from legitimate sources to the black market. And then, of course, my responsibility was the maritime border. We were literally seizing marijuana by the metric ton on a weekly basis. That wasn't destined for the medical marijuana market in California or anywhere else. So the black market will undercut the legitimate market for marijuana and other drugs. It's not taxed, it's not regulated, there's no quality control. You're going to have somebody entrepreneurial who is going to come in and undercut legitimate markets as they do today in states like California and Colorado.
Okay, I won't continue that then. Thank you for
Great
your
question,
explanation. I
Thank
appreciate
you.
it.
Senator Decay.
Is there like if marijuana was legalized, is there a way to test for the amount of THC in a system if a car is pulled over for?
Thank you for the question, Senator. Right now, the answer is no. I mean, it can be done through a blood test, but that's not something we're equipped to do on the roadside.
Well, I mean, so like the gist of my questions are, like with alcohol impairment for DWI, it's what, 0.08. I was just wondering where, if it was legal, where they would be, their driving would be impaired enough where a person could be arrested for overindulging.
It's a great question, Senator. So right now, there is not like a PBT, like you might have seen somebody using a roadside breathalyzer. We don't have a device like that for marijuana yet. I know there's some companies who are working on that. If that is developed and it's proven effective, it would be a great tool for law enforcement to help determine if someone is impaired. If someone is impaired by marijuana or other drugs, it can be very difficult to detect on the roadside. Unfortunately, we often find it after somebody's been involved in a crash or some other tragedy.
Thank you.
Senator.
Thank you. Other questions? So let me ask you this. Is there a bigger, so I've been hearing a lot about fentanyl and other things getting into something else that somebody doesn't realize is fentanyl. Is there a bigger problem with that in states where everything's illegal? You have, no legal marijuana dispensaries, whatever. And then there would be, if it's entirely black market, do you see what I'm saying? Like, is there a bigger problem of like fake marijuana, which is actually fentanyl, in places where it's not legal versus legal?
Thanks for the question, Senator. I really don't know that I can answer that intelligently, but I can say this. The folks who are utilizing the black market, whether it be fentanyl, whether it be marijuana, other drugs, there is a great market in addiction, and they are trying to get more people addicted so that their business can thrive. That's the essence of the fentanyl market. Why would somebody put fentanyl in marijuana? Other than the fact that it's highly addictive, and they need that addiction. They thrive on that for their business.
So would regulating it, making it legal, regulating it, all that sort of thing, would that have any effect on limiting the amount of that, we're going to put this in here to get you addicted, that would happen?
Thanks, Senator. It'd be speculative on my part. All I can say is the states that have gone down this road before are still experiencing a thriving black market. The whole fentanyl laced in everything is still pretty new, unfortunately, and I just don't think there's enough data out there to make an intelligent, observation on that.
Well, thank you for trying to, that's something I think we should be thinking about too. So thank you for trying to think through that with me. I guess I'll make sure the committee doesn't have any other questions. All right.
Thank you, Vice Chair.
Next opponent.
Good afternoon, Chairman Wayne and Vice Chair DeBoer and members of the Judiciary Committee. My name is Dr. Roger Donovic. I am the Executive Medical Officer within the Department of Health and Human Services, and I'm a board certified psychiatrist. I'm here to testify in opposition to LB 22 and LB 634. As DHHS has previously testified, increasing accessibility of marijuana for any purpose poses a risk to the health and safety of Nebraska residents. At this time, marijuana is not approved by the Food and Drug Administration for any medical uses and is classified by the Federal Drug Enforcement Administration as a Schedule I controlled substance. Substances in Schedule I are listed as highly addictive and have no currently accepted medical use. Decriminalizing the use and possession of a Schedule I drug does not protect the health and safety interests of Nebraskans. In 2017, the National Academy of Sciences reviewed the available research on cannabis use and noted the following negative impacts. Substantial evidence exists that smoking cannabis long-term can increase episodes of chronic bronchitis and other respiratory symptoms. Cannabis use is also associated with the increased risk for schizophrenia and other forms of psychosis, as well as motor vehicle accidents. Prenatal exposure to cannabis is associated with lower birth weights. In adolescence, acute cannabis use can impair learning, memory, and attention, and there's evidence of an association between cannabis use and an impaired academic achievement and education outcomes. Heavy cannabis users are more likely to report thoughts of suicide than non-users, and in individuals with bipolar disorder, nearly daily cannabis users show increased symptoms of the disorder than non-users. Additionally, another study in California showed an increase in emergency department visits due to increased cannabis use, particularly among older adults. The number of cannabis-related emergency department visits increased from 366 to 12,167 visits over a 14-year span between 2005 and 2019. These studies show that increased use of marijuana associated with legalization and commercialization will likely lead to increased emergency department visits statewide, which will put even more strain on our already strained healthcare systems. The role of DHHS, Division of Public Health, is to protect the health and safety of Nebraskans. Participating in these two bills to ensure the cultivation, manufacture, distribution, and sales of cannabis in this state, which would be conducted in accordance with the bill, simply promotes the use of.
I'm going to stop you just for a second because you red light, and then I'll ask you to continue. So
Okay.
would you continue?
Yes, sorry about that. And the other bill, which moves to decriminalize the use, will essentially increase the potential use of this drug within the state. In summary, marijuana remains listed in a Schedule 1 on the Drug Enforcement Administration Schedule of Controlled Substances with no approved medical uses. Increased usage may lead to increased negative health impacts and a greater strain on our health systems within the state. Legalization and commercialization of cannabis puts the health and safety of Nebraskans at risk. We respectfully request that the Judiciary Committee not advance this legislation. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions for this testifier? I'll ask you, in the study that showed that there were more emergency room visits, do you know what the nature of those emergency room visits was? Did it say in the literature?
I would have to get the paper and send you the paper to look at the exact breakdown, but a lot of it is for psychiatric symptoms and things like that, psychosis.
Okay, so your recollection at the time, I mean, and I would love to see that, so please send that to me.
Okay.
Would be that it was mainly or largely at least mental health issues?
Yeah, mental health issues. Cannabis use has also been linked to strokes, cardiac events, and as we know, motor vehicle accidents, and other sorts of injuries.
Okay, I'd love to see that study. Thank you so much. Other questions? I do not see any. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next opponent testifier. Welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Vice Chair DeBoer and members of the Judiciary Committee. My name is Laurel Muting. It's Lorelle, last name Mueting. I'm the Prevention Director at Heartland Family Service, and I'm here to testify in opposition to LB 22 and LB 634. So as the Prevention Director, our team's goal is to prevent people from having problems with alcohol and other drugs. I have many concerns with LB 634. Sound public policy should be based on science and research with public safety at the forefront of policy, not based simply on what people want. This bill is not good public policy because it puts public safety at risk. Just to be clear, we're not talking about the marijuana of the 1930s or the 1970s or even the 2000s. The marijuana that this legislation would bring to our state is highly potent and highly addictive. In other commercialized states, edibles, vapes, and concentrates make up 95% of the market. And these are not things that are grown naturally. So when you hear people talk about legalizing a plant, that's not what these bills would do. Sure, they would legalize the plant, but that's not what the products that people are going to be selling with these bills. It's clear by legalizing marijuana and THC, this will increase access. When we increase access to a substance, people are going to use it more, not less. When people use it more, we will inevitably see more impairment problems that affect more than just the person using. Marijuana is a psychoactive substance, which means it causes a high, and when under the influence of THC, a person does not have the ability to make good decisions. This is why this bill is a public safety concern, because when people use THC, other problems happen that don't just affect the person using, like car crashes, fatalities from car crashes, increased crime, child abuse and neglect, social problems, employment problems, ER visits, and the list goes on. So I would please ask you to vote no on this bill to protect the health and safety of all Nebraskans. And in addition, for LB 22, there is no need for this bill. It's defined as a decriminalization bill, but really it would just outright legalize marijuana and allow for the commercialization of it, including edible products. When a for-profit industry that's based on addiction is given a foothold in a state, it doesn't take very long to see the problems that come with it. So I just want you to understand that there are many Nebraskans who do not want to legalize marijuana for commercialization or recreational use or whatever you want to call it. Many of us want to live in a state we are proud to call home that's free from all the problems that come from commercialized marijuana. I'd be happy to entertain any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the committee? I do not see any. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next opponent testifier.
Good afternoon. Vice Chair DeVore, members of the committee, my name is Corey O'Brien, COREYO''BRIEN. I am Chief Prosecutor in the Nebraska Attorney General's Office. Today I appear on behalf of Attorney General Mike Hilgers in the Nebraska Attorney General's Office in opposition to both LB 22 and LB 634. As the Attorney General, Mike Hilgers set forth this morning, the legalization of marijuana is wrong for Nebraska and is unconstitutional because marijuana, the highly concentrated and potent THC products that would be legalized under these bills, as of this very moment, are listed as a Schedule I drug, both under Nebraska law, but more importantly, under the federal drug control schedules. And any bill that would conflict with the law, with that law, the federal law in particular, violates the Supremacy Clause. Because of the Attorney General's sworn obligation to uphold the United States Constitution and Nebraska law enforcement's ability to have a similar duty to enforce federal law, the Nebraska Attorney General's Office is opposed to LB 22 and LB 634. I'd certainly be willing to answer any questions. I did want to answer or respond to the question that Senator Geist posed to Colonel Baldock. I have sat in a number of proffers, interviews with high-level cartel members over the years. There is zero chance that they're going to evaporate or disappear if we legalize marijuana. In fact, my colleagues in Colorado that I talk to quite frequently says that their black market has expanded simply for the fact that marijuana is so profitable to the cartels and the consumer base or customer base has expanded as a result of legalization. So that is one fear that the Attorney General's office has, is that the black market will actually expand and not contract as some of the advocates have predicted.
Are there any questions? I have a question about the Supremacy Clause that is going to show my ignorance, remembering this from law school. If we in Nebraska simply made no statement about any of the federal drugs, we just didn't have a law one way or another about it, would that violate the Supremacy Clause?
If we were not to have laws that ban any drugs.
We didn't make them legal. We just also didn't make them illegal.
No, because the federal law would take precedence over, it would be the law of the land in the state of Nebraska.
And then if we did not have a state crime for something that the federal law made illegal, let's say.
There's several.
Yeah, okay. So we don't have one. We couldn't prosecute someone for the federal law from the state level. Is that right?
That's true.
Okay.
But I also have the obligation to enforce federal law.
Yeah, so that's what I'm trying to tease out. So if we don't have a state law and somebody's laughing at me. We don't have a state law, but there is a federal law, and we can't enforce something because there's no state law on the subject. Then you're in the situation where you have to enforce a federal law and yet you don't have a state law to enforce it by. Would that go to the federal system and the feds would have to enforce it somehow?
Correct. For instance, Nebraska doesn't have a statute that currently prohibits felons from possessing ammunition. Those come across my desk every day, and law enforcement officers encounter that every day. And so those cases then get referred to the federal prosecutors for their prosecution of those crimes.
So if we just
either by us or by federal law or by our state or local law enforcement.
If we just didn't have a law against marijuana, then arguably you'd have to just refer it to the feds.
Arguably, yes.
So
there's no law for me to enforce in state court.
Right. So with respect to the Supremacy Clause in criminal law, I can do this stuff when it comes to railroads, but now we're doing criminal law. It's a lot harder for me to get my mind around it. So with respect to criminal law, if we just don't have anything in the area, because normally the federal law takes over the field, but it's this weird system with criminal law where the federal law exists and the state law exists kind of at the same time. And although we would defer based on the supremacy clause to the federal law, if we don't have any way to prosecute it through the state system, then arguably if the feds decided to just not do anything about it, we couldn't do anything about them not doing anything about it, right?
The supremacy clause, I mean, its chief purpose is if there's a conflict between one set of laws, be it the state law or the federal law, they conflict with one another. The highest law of the land is federal law, and it takes precedence.
So if we just didn't have anything, we wouldn't have a mechanism for prosecuting it, but we wouldn't be in violation of the supremacy clause because we just don't have a mechanism for prosecuting it. We're not necessarily saying it's legal, we just don't have a mechanism for prosecuting it. Would that be right?
Again, if there's no law for me to prosecute somebody in federal court, then, or I'm sorry, in state court, then there's nothing I can do.
So then you would just pass it on to the federal. All right, thank you. That was very helpful. Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Next opponent.
Can I pass out the 22 and 631? Hello again, Senator DeBoer and members of the Judiciary Committee. My name is Maggie Ballard, MAGGIE-BALLARD. And I'm once again here on behalf of Heartland Family Service in opposition of 634 and 22. I want to mention that Heartland has had a great working relationship with Senator McKinney, and we support a lot of the things that Senator Wayne and Senator McKinney put forward. And I do believe that their hearts are in the right places when introducing these bills. And in some ways, I would say, I'm going to keep my testimony specifically to 634. That's if you want to follow along. And I would say that in some ways, this bill could work well in a perfect world. Unfortunately, though, the outcome of passing LB 634 would result in welcoming another industry into our state. I want to highlight some of the circumstances that Senator McKinney brought up when introducing 634. And people can argue over whether it was done on purpose or not, but we know that the war on drugs has disproportionately affected and harmed people of color. The crack cocaine epidemic, disparities in sentencing made that obvious. Unfortunately, we see that disparities remain in sentencing around alcohol, despite it being legal. Changing the legal status of a drug does not undo systemic racism. Alcohol is legal, and we see that while African American people are less likely than non-Hispanic white people to drink and binge drink, they are more likely to experience the harms from alcohol consumption. Across our nation, Black, Indigenous, and people of color are arrested at disproportionately higher rates for alcohol-related offenses. So while all these things are true, unfortunately, this bill would not reduce the prison population, prevent police from enforcing the law with prejudice, or prevent the courts from sentencing with prejudice. Giving a license to a business owner to sell marijuana in the communities that have been hurt the most and calling it an equity clause does not solve the problem either. Again, looking at alcohol as an example, liquor stores selling lottery tickets and cigarettes overwhelm communities of color so that people live closer to a store that sells liquor, tobacco, and lottery tickets than stores that sell fresh vegetables. The last thing I want to bring up, and I'm kind of surprised I haven't heard it talked about more today. If I run out of time, I hope you'll ask some questions about it. Delta 8, Delta 10, THCA, and more derivatives of the cannabis plant have been and continue to be sold here in Nebraska as soon as the hemp law passed in 2018. We have an industry here, and we need to start thinking of ways to regulate them before we consider bringing in Delta 9 THC. So for this reason, I respectfully ask you to indefinitely postpone LB 634. I also would like to go on record as saying that when it comes to the decriminalization bill of LB 22, I think reducing the fine from $300 would be something that we would support.
All right, thank you for your testimony. Any questions from the committee? Don't see any today.
Can I answer a couple questions I heard ask someone else?
Typically, we don't do that,
It did last.
but we'll let Senator Decay ask you a question.
What were the questions you heard that you would like to answer?
I would be happy. Thank you for your question, Senator Decay. When Senator DeBoer asked about ER visits in other states, I was kind of surprised to hear the quote be about older adults, because what we come across is much more data around like poison control center calls and ER visits for children that have accidentally ingested edibles, especially from their parents. Another common condition that people are being seen for in the ER is, and it's really hard for me to pronounce, I'm going to butcher it, hyperemesis gravidarum. So it's characterized by a lot of vomiting and nausea, and it is common in very, very, very heavy cannabis consumers. And usually the only relief that people will get is being under a shower and letting the steam kind of treat them. So it's kind of a mysterious thing, and it's not, there's not exactly any rhyme or reason why some heavy cannabis users get it more often than others. But overwhelmingly, and I've heard this from some of our clients at Heartland Family Service, when people are oftentimes going to the hospital because of accidentally ingesting, it's because it's so much more powerful than they thought it was going to be. We know if I were to smoke marijuana, the high I'm going to get from it is going to hit me pretty much right away. Whereas if I eat something like an edible, it's going to take anywhere from 45 minutes all the way up to 4 hours before that high actually sets in. So if I don't realize that and I follow the directions on the package, I'm eating a 1/10 of a brownie, I wait 20, 30 minutes, I don't feel anything, then what am I going to do? I'm going to continue eating more. So then by the time that high actually sets in, there's an increased chance of me having more of that sick feeling that I wouldn't have gotten if I had followed the original directions.
All right, any other questions? I don't see any. Next opponent testifier.
It doesn't move as easy as I thought. My name is Kathy Wilmot, KATHY-WILMOT. I want to clarify that I'm speaking on my own behalf and also on behalf of Nebraska Eagle Forum. And I just am going to read you some quick things that I found from looking at some states where this has been legalized, and I'm here to testify in opposition to both bills. Just go through them quickly. It promotes, the legalization promotes pro-legalizers. It gives promises, but those promises have never really materialized in the various states, and you heard many of the promises here today. The black market has actually increased, not decreased, and also more teens are become users in legalized states, and they often then use more often, and the chemicals or the product they use is stronger. Marijuana-related arrests do not decrease. The arrests are disproportionate to the races. Also, marijuana tax revenues are much lower than those that are normally promised, and they don't come close to covering the costs that are actually we see from the harms that occur. Regulations are weak or non-existent. Also, more law enforcement resources are needed to deal with marijuana after legalization. And some of the harms have also increased in legal states. Youth addiction's up. Teen addiction to marijuana is doubled from what it is for alcohol. Marijuana-related auto collisions and deaths are definitely up. The ER visits that you heard about, also the cardiac things that are reported at the ER. Marijuana is the most common illicit drug identified in impaired drivers. The risk of motor vehicle collisions increases twofold, and I know in Colorado especially they were really high after legalization. Teen suicides have increased, and marijuana actions out in, I know, Colorado. Some of the farmers have really had trouble in the rural areas because some of the farmers are raising it, some do not wish to. Hemp spreads terribly. I know as living on a farm, I just didn't even like hemp being legalized because now we're fighting that all the time. But they get pressure through of the cartels coming in that are pressuring people that are raising the marijuana to sell to them, and it's causing a lot of difficulty between neighbors there. I have relatives in Oregon and Colorado, and neighborhoods have absolutely gone to pot. People are living on the streets. So there's a lot of side things that begin to happen that I don't think we want here. And also, I would rather protect the youth and try to work with them.
All right, thank you for your testimony. Are there questions?
Thank you.
Don't see any right now. Next opponent.
Good afternoon, Judiciary Committee. My name is Mary Hilton, MaryHilton, and I'm testifying on behalf of myself as a mom and a concerned citizen of Nebraska. I have many concerns about this bill, which will create an atmosphere of drug use in Nebraska. First, LB 634 creates a huge bureaucratic framework that will be expensive. Yet the bill does not come with a fiscal note. After reading the bill, all 161 pages of it, I observed that the sponsor attempted to put in some safeguards from lessons learned by other states that have legalized. But after studying marijuana legalization consequences for the last 6 years, the facts dictate that marijuana cannot be controlled. There cannot be enough safeguards, and it cannot be regulated no matter the well intentions of policymakers. Our culture in Nebraska will be negatively affected with legalization. Once legalized, it is nearly impossible to keep marijuana dispensaries out of neighborhoods. Poor neighborhoods are hurt the most by legalization. Yet this bill actually targets and rewards poverty-stricken individuals and areas of towns with incentives to own dispensaries. Now, not only will there be a liquor shop at every corner, but also a marijuana dispensary. The experiences of third world, Central and South American countries is telling. Selling drugs doesn't make an area more prosperous or safe. And this bill does not allow a local political subdivision to opt out. Yet there will be 150 such locations across the state of Nebraska. But really all that's needed to know about this bill and its consequences can be summed up in section 142 of the bill, the warning label section. This is most honest part of the bill. The first warning label must state, warning, this product has intoxicating effects. There may be health risk associated with consumption of this product. The second, smoking is hazardous to your health. Third, using cannabis may be habit forming and addictive. And fourth, cannabis impairs concentration, coordination, and judgment. These warning labels are true and factual. So let me explain, and I have everything I'm saying sourced in your notes that I handed to you. Marijuana affects motor skills, memory, and motivation. Executive function and decision-making is impaired by marijuana, and marijuana affects social behavior. While overdose of THC doesn't usually kill an adult outright, it has killed babies whose mothers are users, and I will not go into the other things that you've already heard today. But marijuana has long been known to cause hallucinations and paranoia that can lead to violence and crime. It increases workplace accidents and increases crime where it's been legalized, especially when cannabis is used in the teen years.
And I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to.
Okay.
But let me see if there's a question. I bet there will be. There we go, Senator Holcroft.
Would you like to finish your statement?
I would, thank you. So, especially when cannabis is used in the teen years, and teen use definitely does increase. That's what the statistics show. The long-term effects are really troubling. Cannabis halts brain development, even with one use. Adolescent cannabis use can lead to adult addiction, adult depression, and adult mental illness. This is what the long-term medical studies show, and the sources of that are in my notes. Marijuana is harmful, addictive, and it does kill. The Colorado Centennial Report recently stated that 70% of drivers admit to driving high that are users, and 20% admit to driving high every day and say that they believe that it makes them better drivers. Drugged driving with marijuana does kill. Marijuana kills in that it has led to suicide. Studies show that there is a 7-time increase in suicide attempts among teenage marijuana users. Colorado Springs has experienced an epidemic of teenage use linked to marijuana use, teenage suicide linked to marijuana use. So overall, marijuana predicts less success. Pot legalization hurts kids, families, neighborhoods, schools, and cities, and this is evident from California to Oregon to Colorado to Illinois and Florida. So I would encourage you to oppose both of these bills.
All right. Are there other questions? I do not see any. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your time.
Next opponent. Is there anyone here who would like to testify in opposition to the bill? I do not see any in a neutral capacity.
Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chairman DeBoer and members of the Judiciary. My name is Bill Hawkins, and I'm coming in as a neutral position on LB 22. LB 22 doesn't have a regulated system. I want to thank Senator Wayne and his staff, Senator McKinney and his staff, for putting together a tremendous presentation on this cannabis issue. The cannabis issue here in the country is a big issue. You've heard from opposition, you've heard from proponents. In a neutral position with Senator Wayne's bill, there is no tax and regulated system, and there are no controls. And so even though that would be great, I could carry as much cannabis as I wanted, I could grow as much as I wanted, and it would be a free-for-all. And that's not what cannabis users today want. You've heard of the sky is falling here, that teen use is up, everything is up. Drug driving, marijuana related is not marijuana caused. And I want to just explain that to you. One question Senator Decay had was the difference between cigarettes and cannabis. Nicotine is a poison. It's an insecticide that has been used for decades, centuries. It will kill you. An extract of nicotine, if you drink it, will kill you. Cannabis is a medicinal herb that doesn't have a toxic level. And both my parents died of lung cancer, and so I know firsthand the devastating effects of nicotine and alcohol. So I encourage you to look at both these bills, but we need a tax and regulated system. The number of states, New York, Missouri, Illinois, Maryland, all the eastern states are all legalizing cannabis. They're ending this war on drugs. So I encourage you to look at these bills and step up and accept the fact that cannabis use is here and it's time to tax and regulate it. I will say, not as a threat, but the People's Cannabis Petition, all persons have the right to use all plants in the genus cannabis, is already filed and is ready to be circulated, and it will be circulated and on the ballot. So I want to thank you for your time, and I appreciate your interest in this subject.
Okay, thank you. I did sort of lose track of which bills you've testified on and which you didn't.
I testified.
Typically, We do not
I-
allow someone to come up in a joint hearing in two different sections.
I
So-
certainly understand that, and I did discuss that with Senator Wayne prior to this.
Okay.
And I apologize if you did not get that, but
Yeah, nope,
it
that's
is
okay.
two separate bills.
I get it. We
And-
just, in
and-
the future, are going to have the policy, I think, of just coming from one
Well,
place in
you
a
know,
joint hearing.
In addressing that, it is the people's right to testify on the bills. And so we could discuss that further and.
I get it. We'll talk
Yeah,
about it offline,
certainly.
okay?
Yeah, I appreciate that.
All right,
And I thank you
Let's-
for your time.
Yes, let's have the next neutral testifier.
Good afternoon, Vice Chairman DeBoer, members of the Judiciary Committee. Had to make sure I didn't say General Affairs there. I'm sorry, in different states. My name is Hobert Roop, Hobert Rupe. I currently serve as the Executive Director of the Nebraska Liquor Control Commission. And I want to make it clear that on the underlying, the main thrust of both these bills, in fact, we have no position on LB 22, on LB 634, we're neutral. Where we want to bring up to the attention is on the, if they were to go forward, is on the enactment. What this does is creates a whole nother regulatory body. We've been involved in monitoring this issue for almost 20 years, ever since the possibility of legalized recreational marijuana was brought up through the National Conference of Liquor Administrators, which I'm a past president, has been monitoring these bills and keeping them discussed. And as you'll notice, what I'll call the original, the OG4, of those states, Colorado and California both created their own separate entities. Oregon and Washington rolled it into their duties of their liquor control commissions in both those states. And you've seen sort of about a 50-50 split of that. Some of them have rolled it in to their existing regulatory bodies, and some have created other ones. The last couple of years in our legislative letter, we've said that it should be regulated. It should come to us only because we've actually been doing some groundwork. As some of you may or may not know, we are finally upgrading our 30-plus-year-old computer system. Should be going online, knock on wood, second quarter of 2024. As part of the RFP for that, we specifically said, does your process have a cannabis component which could be added on at a cost saving as opposed to building a brand new computer system? I looked at the fiscal note, I was a little shocked. For us to get a brand new off-the-shelf licensing using computer system is over $3.5 million. So the idea of somebody being able to do it with $800,000 from the OCIO's office, I'd like to see what comes out. Since we're right in the guts of building a brand new complete licensing and tax collection software. And that's the big thing, is tax collection. We already license people. We background people. We work with patrol already. We collect excise taxes. We collect in excess of $38 million a year in excise tax currently. Our position would be, as Nebraskans are always normally trying to do things the most efficient way, instead of creating a whole nother level of bureaucracy, you might want to consider, if you forward this, to turning this into the Nebraska Liquor Control Commission. Because if you read the statute, it parrots us about 80% of it, how it's set up. No more than 3 commissioners, no more than 2 from the same congressional district, no more than 2 from the same political party. You can tell a lot of whoever drafted it was utilizing the existing Liquor Control Act as their guidance. I've gone under the red. I'll be happy to answer any questions about my testimony or about any other interesting issues of regulating products.
Thank you for your testimony. Are there any questions? I do not see any. Thank you so much for your work.
Thank you.
All right, next neutral testifier. Is there anyone else who would like to testify in the neutral capacity? I do not see any, so we're going to first have Senator McKinney come up to close on LB 634, but while he's walking up, I will tell you for the record, we've received 24 letters of support, or 24 letters for LB 22, 14 in support and 10 in opposition, and for 634, we've received 18 letters, 10 in support, 7 in opposition, and 1 in the neutral position. All right, Senator McKinney.
Thank you, Senator DeBoer. Thank you to those that came to testify, whether for, against, or neutral. I thought it was an interesting hearing overall. You know, I was thinking, you know, when Prohibition ended and alcohol became legal, and fast forward to present day, are bootleggers undercutting the legal market of the sale of alcohol? Although we still have bootleggers, and I'm not arguing that if we legalize marijuana, we'll eliminate the black market. But history is history and facts are facts. Bootleggers aren't undercutting Budweiser. It's just not happening. And also, sound public policy should be passed to decrease barriers. Opponents that talk about public safety and everything else, but forget to mention how laws and these laws around cannabis and marijuana have been used to terrorize communities. And, you know, honestly, if I felt like they really cared, they would come to the legislature, work with senators to introduce bills to ban alcohol, ban tobacco, and those type of things if you really truly cared about people and public safety. And, you know, cartels, the issue about, cartels are gonna move in, and did cartels move in when alcohol was legalized? And I personally feel like the black market only continues because we haven't legalized marijuana across the board. Because of that, you allow for a black market to exist. Then it was the comment that you legalize it, systematic racism won't end. That is true, because America has a long way, and it's a lot of systems that we got to demolish as far as addressing the whole systemic racism thing. And it's not just with marijuana laws, it's a bunch of laws that we got to get off the books and change. And then you talked about equity and those type of things. And honestly, the communities that you're saying that have been harmed and will be harmed further, I would also argue that because they haven't been able to profit off the sale of cannabis, they've been over-policed and criminalized by these laws. No, they don't have the equity or the financial power to fight these cases. But if we legalize it and set up a tax structure, hopefully, and once it passes, people that benefit off the most are those that have been most affected by it. And in doing so, they'll be able to fight these cases. But, you know, neither here or there. And then it's like this mention of caring about poor people and what's going to happen to poor people. Well, marijuana has been illegal my whole life. And North Omaha has been poor my whole life. Don't use this, your argument against this bill, to say I care about poor people. Because if you did, you'd be fighting for changes to eliminate poverty. And I don't think that's happening. I think ignorance and racism affect life outcomes, poor educational outcomes, poor housing, and low economic input. And that comes from the opposition of this bill. And, you know, I used cannabis before in my life as a teen, as an adult. I became a state senator. I have 2 college degrees. I'm in law school, and I think my brain development is fine. And I'm open to the Liquor and Control Commission regulating it. I have no problem with that. We got these, if you know how bill drafting went this session, details were sometimes missed in a lot of bills, but I'm open to working on an amendment to make it better. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there questions for Senator McKinney? I do not see any, Senator McKinney. That will bring us to LB 22 and a closing by Senator Wayne.
Because I'm lazy. Justin Wayne, I won't say a whole lot, but the idea of the federal government, wait for the federal government, just that line of thinking, there are things we do as a state to that go up to the U.S. Supreme Court in which they reverse themselves. They do that because a state passed a law. So it'd be like the supremacy clause and the law of the land. If that's the case, then laws would never be overturned, unconstitutional, or ever challenged, especially at the federal level. We have a history. In fact, our country was founded on the history of states challenging the federal laws and taking them to the Supreme Court and making them rule on them. I mean, if that's the case, wait for the federal government, then we wouldn't pass a lot of bills that we explicitly challenge the federal government all the time. So with that, I'll answer any questions.
Are there questions for Senator Wayne? Senator Wayne, I do have a question about the supremacy clause for you.
Okay.
So the supremacy clause, I think the negative supremacy clause only comes from the Commerce Clause. It's an interstate Commerce Clause, negative supremacy clause. So that if it's the occupy the field negative Commerce Clause, that only comes through occupy the field negative supremacy clause only comes through the Commerce Clause. Is that your understanding?
Yeah, it's a dormant Commerce Clause. Gotcha.
Dormant.
We're going all the way back to first year of law school.
I know,
Yeah.
well, that's why you got negative instead of dormant, because your time since law school is shorter than mine.
Yes.
So the supremacy clause then doesn't apply to criminal law in the same way, right? So the supremacy clause would say if there's a state crime that somehow contradicts a federal crime, the federal crime would sort of trump, but we can make a law, we can make something a crime that the feds don't have a crime, right?
Yes, and oftentimes we actually do that. If you look at our gun statute regarding prohibited person, 15 years ago, the federal authorities were picking up all of those cases, and it wasn't until we as a legislature decided we're going to have a stiffer penalty than the feds that we actually, now the feds don't even pick up them there at the state level. So just like the ammunition, there's no law in the state against a prohibited person having ammunition. So the federal authorities would have to prosecute those cases, in which they do. But if we can make laws contrary to federal government, the federal government is a separate body that has to enforce those laws, even if they're legal underneath our color of law. We do that all the time, actually.
So there's no common law of crimes, so we can make crimes, they can make crimes. It doesn't matter if they make crimes and we make crimes. They have to prosecute their crimes, we prosecute our crimes. If they don't match, then it just goes to the other group, is that right?
Correct.
So with respect to at least decriminalization of anything in Nebraska, there isn't a supremacy clause issue.
I don't think so.
All right, thank you, Senator Wayne. Any other questions for Senator Wayne? I do not see any. That will end our hearings on LB 22 and LB 634 and end our hearings for the day. Thank you.